Evening, LaFalcha. Welcome back to Irish Granny Helen. It's our Saturday book, and we're on the final video of our glimpse of Anne Rule, the fabulous, fabulous true crime writer. And Anne Jaeger, her friend who wrote the book, had this weird coincidence in her life. This chapter 30, is called Killer Coincidences. So we talked quite a bit about Anne Rule having worked sitting next to Ted Bundy. And then after getting a contract to write a book about the Green River Killer before he had been identified, and then discovering that he'd been identified and she knew him because he would haunt her public appearances. That's creepy. So Anne Jaeger had her little brush with weirdness also. They both met killers as children. So Anne, of course, her grandfather, was the sheriff, and her grandmother took care of the prisoners, and Anne would bring them their dinner, and she met them and remembered them. Jaeger met Charlie Manson at the age of 9. This story is crazy. So she was camping with her family on a beach near Santa Barbara. So I have my own little personal fond memory of the Manson family. So when they had committed their terrible crimes, the first night that they did it, when they killed Sharon Tate and all those people, I was babysitting for neighbors. And I can remember seeing it on the news and just being completely freaked out because these killers were on the loose. Now, granted, it happened in LA and I lived in Santa Barbara. And so everybody reassured me, don't worry about it because that's 90 miles, 100 miles away. You have nothing to worry about. So then the next day, they killed the La Biancas. I was babysitting for a different neighbor and was equally freaked out. But time went by, and eventually they were identified and caught. But what chilled me was at one point, Vincent Bugliosi wrote that book, Helter Skelter. And at one point, somebody in the Manson family mentioned to him that they had driven up the coast and gone to Santa Barbara and were driving around the streets of Santa Barbara, kind of hunting for their next victim, and would stop at the red light and look at the people in the car waiting at the red light next to them and to decide, well, should we follow them? Shall we kill them? And nothing came of that. That freaked me out. I just always knew, even as a teenager, that this guy was a threat to a broader spectrum of people. So Anne Jaeger is at the beach camping with her parents. They had a camping trailer, and they're at the beach by Santa Barbara, which is a very popular place to go camping. So this bus pulls up. There's nobody else in this parking lot, in this camping in this area. And this bus pulled up full of girls and one scruffy guy. And Anne said she was mesmerized by this really odd group of people. So that night, they all sat around a campfire with the Manson family. She said that the girls were nice, but they were dirty and they smelled bad. And Charlie tried to get her dad to promote his music. Her father was, interested in music, but he didn't really have connections. But her father kind of fell under Charlie's spell and sat with him for hours and listened to his nonsense. The next day, one of the girls came over to the trailer, and she said that she had with her a large green tiki mug with a chocolate bar in it. And she offered to take Jaeger, who was 9 at the time, for a walk. I'd like to think nowadays that parents' red flags would go off if somebody offered some complete yucky stranger volunteered to walk your child alone on the beach. I don't think so. But her mom said, oh, sure. She said she tried to signal to her mother she didn't want to go. But her mother said, oh, sure. So off she goes. And she says the girl walked her far from the camp and then gave her the third degree about her family. You know, what do your parents do? Do your parents have money? Where are you going? Who knows you're here? That kind of thing. So Jaeger told her, oh, they were really poor. They had no money. That's why they were in the camping trailer. They were actually living in it. Her dad had no job. And she said that they were living off clams that they got on the beach and vegetables that fell off the back of vegetable trucks. They would follow these trucks. There's a lot of agriculture there. The girl said that she couldn't talk to her own family. The girl could not talk to her own family. And Jaeger offered her a dime to call. She's just a little kid. She thought it meant that she hadn't had access to a phone. She offered to give her a dime. And the girl, she said, her attitude towards Jaeger changed. She'd been kind of cold and analytical and nosy. But when Jaeger said, oh, I can give you a dime, you can call your mom. And she said this girl, just her whole attitude changed. She softened and seemed nicer to her. So they went back to camp. And she said that her dad was really mesmerized, really drawn to Manson. That night her father was still talking with Charlie Manson. Well, she was in the trailer with a little portable television watching the rioting at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. You remember that? Her mother wanted to distract her from the violence and sent her out to check on her father. And Jaeger said it wasn't like him to be that involved with a complete stranger. The conversation was over her head, she said. She heard them talking about cops and record deals. And her father had been in the Royal Canadian Navy Band in World War II. And so he and Charlie talked music quite a bit. But her father didn't have any connections. When he came in that night, she heard him have a heated conversation with her mother in whispers, and they were mad. Excuse me. But in the middle of the night, quietly, they hooked up their trailer and they left. They had not planned on it. They just quietly left. And then later, Manson's all over the news, and her parents completely freaked out. She said she didn't want to remember him, but this whole story became kind of a family embarrassment. And also, they were still freaked out. She said when her father was 93 in 2016, she asked him, Dad, what happened that night when you were talking to Charles Manson? And her dad said Charles asked if he could go into their trailer to use the toilet. And fortunately, they said, well, it's broken. We are not using it ourselves. And Manson looked at her father and said, when I want something, I take it. And her father said, you'll have to go through me. And Charlie said to him, I only hurt people who are afraid of me. And her father stood up to him. Her father stood his ground, eye to eye, and he said, I'm not afraid of you. So she was disturbed to know that as a helpless child, her family was trapped in an aluminum box right next to the Manson family. However, it seems like what was being implied was it freaked her parents out. They never wanted to talk about it or think about it. And after he died, Jaeger looked him up, and when they met him on the beach, he'd just gotten out of prison. He'd been in the prison for trafficking, and he fathered a child with a 14-year-old that they met on the beach. One of the girls that her family met on the beach, he had a baby with this girl. And Jaeger wonders, she thinks, now that I look in retrospect, I think I might have been a target. and that they took me aside earlier in the day to pump me for information about my family and to see did they want to include me in their big family. And they were planning on getting into the trailer and getting rid of her parents and kidnapping her. So when her story was made public, some said, oh, you're lying. That's not true. But many praised her parents for managing to get out of that danger years ago. And that is just a creepy story. Jaeger once told Anne Rule about this, and she said Anne believed her immediately, and they both had glimpses of a killer's mind, and that's exactly, they were predators like sharks, they just opportunists. Anne warned her, serial killers always wear a mask. She said Ted never wanted people to see who he really was. Ted Bundy. He never wanted people to see who he really was. The mask allowed him to be a different thing to different people. A liar, a manipulator, a bloodthirsty killer. He seems more covert than Manson, and without the cult followers. Manson wanted his people to know his dangerous side, and he ruled them through fear and intimidation like he tried to do with my dad, which is hard to do when you're a small, scrawny man like Manson. And she asked Anne, wasn't Bundy more intelligent, more well-dressed, more sophisticated? Anne said behind Bundy's mask, he was a schemer, a stalker, and a killer and a liar. But he was also smart, and he showed so much compassion at the hotline. And that's the only side he allowed me, Anne, to see. Given the complexity of his crimes, it seems possible Bundy may have been willing to retaliate if he ever saw Anne as a threat to expose him. She walked a tightrope for years and didn't know it most of the time. Okay, where am I? Leslie, Anne's daughter, met Bundy when Leslie was 14 in 1972. She was waiting at the hotline for her mom to get done, her shift, to give Leslie a ride home. And she had a friend with her, and several friends with her, and they were swooning over Bundy. But Leslie said she didn't get it. She never felt that way. He wouldn't meet her eyes, ever. Anne was not afraid of Bundy. In retrospect, she said, he killed strangers, more than 5 men, more than a 5-minute conversation with someone made them no longer anonymous to him. You had to be a total and complete stranger. At first, after his arrest, Anne wasn't sure what to think. She wasn't sure, was he really the killer that they say he was? She wrote to him in jail. She even sent him $10 now and then when he was in jail. But she said she stopped when she figured out what he was. And she said she was in her 40s. It's different for an adult. Jaeger told her how hollow, scary Manson's eyes were, like he had no soul. She said that when Manson got excited, his eyes got abnormally wide open, manic. And, that's also true of Diane Downs. There's a picture in here that I just saw. Well, I just noticed again. That is super creepy of Diane Downs. I hope I can find it. Yeah. This is in 1994. And this picture's all over the internet, so I can show it to you. Just those eyes. Ugh. Anyway, Anne tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. It was just really hard for her to believe that she'd known him and that he was what he was. But when they finally, when he was given the charges, when he was indicted in court, this is before he was found guilty, but when he was indicted, she went out in the hall and puked. She just couldn't believe it. It was hard to understand how you could be so charming and secretive and so brutal in the next minute. No one ever used the green tiki mug at her house. Chapter 31, Duck for Cover. January of 94, Shane Stant hit Nancy Kerrigan with a baton so that her rival, Tonya Harding, could win the U.S. figure skating championship. And if you remember, this happened in Portland, Oregon. It's where Tonya learned to skate. Harding later pled guilty to felony hindering because she was part of a cover-up. Her bodyguard hired Stant and his uncle to keep Kerrigan out of the Olympics. And so they worked it out. Her husband was in it up to his eyeballs, too. Jaeger worked in Portland at the time as a reporter when this happened. So her station covered the Stant. Oh, okay, now I remember. Oh my God. So her station covered the guy that, Stant that was arrested. They found out that he lived with his grandmother outside of Portland, about a half an hour outside of Portland. So she and the photographer were sent, just go take pictures of the home. So this was 4 days before her daughter's 3rd birthday. She and the photographer get in the car and they drive out of town. They're going to go see, what does it look like where this guy lives? They drove to a road that overlooked his house, the back of the house, from the road above. And while they were there, this old lady came out of the house with a shotgun and started shooting at them. Anne told the video guy, duck, but keep the camera rolling. And later she was given a t-shirt. She said, yeah, that's me shooting, the old lady says. I'm a gun-toting, pistol-packing grandma. But Anne Under Fire, this is Ann Jaeger, the author, Under Fire was so cool that the photographer, he kept rolling, and they got film of all this. But when he went back and told everybody what Anne said, they made her a t-shirt that said, duck, but keep rolling. So this 74-year-old woman was firing at them. On the return to their station, they discovered already there was a reporter here from Seattle, and then ESPN started calling because, this is a big sporting event and everything, and they interviewed her for their breaking news story. She said this bizarre story of Tonya Harding, she tried to avoid it, but it put her in the center of national news. And when Anne heard about it, Anne called her to see, are you okay? And she said, well, Anne, as Diane Downs used to say, you can't kill anyone with a 22. She said, Carl and I had been shot at. Carl was the photographer, by the very same caliber and make of weapon that Diane used to shoot her children. That's so weird. I guess maybe it wasn't a rifle. I don't know. I'm not conversant with guns. But anyway. Chapter 32, Rules Resilience. She always kept in touch with Ann Jaeger. They would visit when they were in the same town. They always talked on the phone. But Jaeger started to notice something. In 2010, the phone calls sort of decreased. And she would leave voicemails and she wouldn't get a reply. And then she started calling and trying to leave a voicemail, and the voicemail was full. And this was very unusual. So she called Leslie, and she wasn't able to get an answer from Ann's daughter, Leslie. Finally, after an inordinate amount of time, an obviously exhausted Leslie called her Anne was almost 80 and she was in the hospital. She had some health issues that had been controlled by medication, but suddenly she got a sore neck, and then she got a stiff neck, and then she had excruciating pain and went to the emergency room. Now she had this spinal meningitis, not exactly like spinal meningitis, but just like it. She had a 50-50 chance to survive some mysterious infection, and she'd been ignoring the pain for weeks. Probably she had an infection somewhere else in her body that went to her spine. They never did find out what the cause of this was. She slowly did start to recover. She had to relearn how to walk. It was really bad. It took her 3 months. She made a miraculous recovery, and she agreed to an interview with Jaeger, who was having an afternoon talk show at this point. And she seemed to be all better. That's really scary. Chapter 33, Rules Relief. So then a couple of years later, at almost 81, she was going strong. She had written another book, and she was getting out of the car at a book signing when she fell in the parking lot, and she broke her hip really badly. She needed a full hip replacement. So when she went home from having her surgery, she needed help, and her 3 kids took care of her 24/7 for a month. They divided up the time and were there for her. Her memory was kind of fuzzy. She was acting confused. She was able to take a few steps with the walker, but really she was needing a wheelchair. At that point, Jaeger, the author, came to visit, but really it was to help give her children a break. Anne was appreciative, but she really wanted to live alone. She had caregivers, and she was still writing. She got hospitalized several times in the next year, but she was still trying to keep up her writing. For the first time ever, she missed a deadline. The book was called Lying in Wait, but it finally did get published in Christmas of 2014 and immediately went to the top of the New York Times bestseller list. Every single book she wrote went to the New York Times bestseller list. In July of 2015, she was 83, and she spoke with Anne. She seemed oddly hushed on the phone, and later, Anne said she found out that there were problems going on in the family that she never had full details of, but something with one of her sons. And Anne made plans for the following weekend to go visit, Anne Jaeger made plans to go visit Anne Rule. But Anne Rule got rushed to the emergency room, and Jaeger met up with Anne's family and a caregiver in the hospital. Anne had had a stroke and was in ICU. She couldn't speak, but she did recognize Jaeger. So Leslie, the daughter, and Jaeger, the best friend, they slept on the floor beside Anne's bed. They took turns going home to shower. Somebody was always with Anne. Jaeger helped Anne to make a list of visitors that she would like to have come visit. Jaeger called everybody and made a visitation schedule with all of the people that Anne wanted to see. On July 25th, all the visitors had come and gone, and Jaeger said her goodbyes to Anne. The next day, she got a call that Anne had been moved out of ICU into hospice care, being kept comfortable. That night, she said there was this weird incident. All of a sudden, a coyote outside started howling in pain. And at the same time that had happened, she found out later Anne died at 20 after 10 on the 26th of July, 2015. Chapter 34, Legendary Rule. In retrospect, Jaeger saw how hard Anne had always worked. She deserved but never expected her meteoric rise. She was really taken by surprise to become quite as famous as she was. she worked every day very hard. In 2011, during a public broadcasting interview, she said she couldn't imagine not writing. She said, I suspect I'll go until I can't pull myself up to the computer anymore. Curiosity made her a lifelong learner. She always needed to know why about things. Anne Rule reminded us what habits made it easier to avoid being prey to killers. She had good advice. Walk with purpose, know where you're going, be aware of your surroundings. Don't accept a stranger's advances, no matter how handsome, charming, or slick their stories are. If being forced into a car or shots are fired, scream and run like your hair is on fire. It's hard to hit a moving target. The number of serial killers today has gone down, and technology is largely to thank for that. It's much harder to go anywhere without being on camera, for one thing. She was one of the first to recognize patterns of behaviors in serial killers, the cycles that they sometimes went through. She thought like a detective and was often asked by law enforcement to be a consult on a case. She won the Washington State Governor's Award for extraordinary leadership in law enforcement. She became a literary legend by reinventing the true crime genre. For Jaeger, her most admirable trait was her humanity. She was understanding. She had kindness towards people. She was compassionate. She was able to put herself in other people's shoes. Afterward, the cover photo, this cover photo is special because there's even a toy gun in her pocket. You can't see this. So it reflects her sense of humor. Jaeger searched for years to find the photographer who took that picture. It was taken in the early 80s. I'll show you the picture. She's looking very Sam Spade-ish. Taken in the early 80s, Jaeger went on to do a gardening show. And as part of her show, a photographer came every week to her garden in her house. So one day, the gardener was packing up. This guy, photographer called Randy Rasmussen, was packing up, and he asked her, just, making chit-chat. He goes, what are you doing this weekend? And she said, oh, I'm visiting my friend Anne Rule. And he said, I know Anne. He had taken this picture. So he was sick that day that he took the picture. And then they had to hang around and wait on the dock for the perfect light. And Anne was shivering, and he felt really sick. He was sweating hot with a fever, and Anne was shivering in the cold on the end of this dock. He was so sick, he said, that Anne took over, mothered him, drove him to the airport to go back home. So Jaeger got the cover picture from him, and the one that best depicts Anne as a person. And the small town girl who wanted to be a detective, but grew up to write arresting stories. That's the end. I hope you enjoyed that. I'm sorry this is kind of short. Maybe we'll do a few cards in my membership. But I really just love the work of Anne Rule, and she covered a lot of the true crime stories that you'll see today, the kind of things you'll see on Dateline, except that she was a pioneer and such a good person. I'm just amazed at what a good person she was. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, my little indulgence, and slán go fóill. Sláinte.